And now I see that Alex has already joined us. Alex, before I introduce you, I have to get my glass of water. Please stay tuned. And now I'm back. It's a virtual conference, but you still need to drink some water in between. Okay, so Alex, it's great to have you with us again. I think our audience knows you from all the previous discussions that we have had. But for those of you who don't, Alex Greenstein is the Director Privacy Shield at the US Department of Commerce. And Alex, I think a lot of our participants today were waiting basically the whole day for you because there have been a lot of interesting announcements in the past couple of days, and I hope we'll be able to shed some light on the discussion and what to expect in the future. So thank you so much for being here today, for taking the time. I think it's a perfect moment to talk about the, enhancing transatlantic data flows discussion again, and the future of the Privacy Shield.
Definitely, no, and thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here again, if only virtually. Hopefully next year, if you'll have me, I can make it in person, but it's good to be here because this is an important topic of conversation, and this is a great event. And I definitely want to come here and talk about sort of the cooperation that we're having between sort of the United States and the European Commission to sort of bring clarity to the post-Schrems II data privacy landscape. We'd also like to talk about sort of the US-EU data privacy framework and what this means for Privacy Shield and the transatlantic economic relationship. And that sort of is I think very central to sort of what we're talking about here. I mean, this sort of commitments that sort of the United States made back in March when our president and President van der Leyen reached a deal in principle on this data privacy framework and how this will, and the work that we're doing with the European Commission to put that in force.
Maybe to break the discussion down into the many different parts, Alex, let's absolutely start with that. So there has been the announcement a couple of months ago by President Biden and President von der Leyen about, basically a political agreement that had been reached. How would you say that will be enhancing data flows and I think what we are all basically asking is, when will they be done?
Well, I mean, I can't sort of speak to sort of some of the articles out there about timelines and things like that. But I can say that sort of we have been sort of working assiduously with our European counterparts on translating the sort of high-level political agreement into practical legal changes that will provide assurances and redress and fully address the concerns raised by the Court of Justice in the Schrems II decision when they invalidated the adequacy decision underlying the Privacy Shield framework. And this has definitely been sort of a long process, and it's definitely required a lot of collaboration and cooperation between sort of the US and EU negotiating teams on this. But I mean, these are critical issues of commerce, national security, and privacy. And I think sort of as with these previous discussions, I mean, this has actually brought us and the EU closer together because we have sort of deepened sort of our mutual understanding of our legal systems and our approaches to this.
Maybe coming back or going back the 2 years to the Schrems II decision by the CJEU, what happened to the Privacy Shield framework when it was invalidated? Was it simply just gone, or were there some parts remaining, or is it still kind of being used but in a different way? So what's the status quo right now?
Right. So when Schrems II, following that decision, Privacy Shield is no longer a valid transfer mechanism, so you cannot rely upon that to transfer data from personal data from Europe to the United States. However, we did continue to operate the framework during this sort of period of time because certainly companies were continuing to abide by those commitments. and those commitments were still enforceable to this day. And the Federal Trade Commission has stated on a couple of occasions, and I think they have actually subsequently brought some enforcement actions on the basis of companies violating their commitments under Privacy Shield, because from their perspective, that's a misrepresentation. If the companies are publicly declaring that they will abide by these principles, that can be enforced against. And so, I mean, this has maintained continuity and also continue to provide protections for EU personal data that was transmitted prior to Schrems 2. And so we've continued to maintain Privacy Shield, but in parallel, we've been having these discussions about that first led to sort of the announcement of the data privacy framework, and then we've continued to have discussions on how to implement that, and that will be taking the form of sort of an executive order that the White House is leading a process on preparing that will sort of take those commitments and translate them into law, and that will address the national security and government access to data concerns that were raised in Schrems 2. Because it's worth noting, as I think we have in the past, that the court did not raise issues with the commercial protections offered under the Privacy Shield framework. That really wasn't the issue. The issue was with government access to data, and that is what the Transatlantic Data Privacy Framework addresses.
So there definitely will be changes in the future. Well, before we go back to that, maybe one other aspect that I think is part of the discussion, but is somewhat not discussed enough in my view, because following Schrems 2, there has also always been discussion whether the SCCs still work that are in place. I mean, we have to switch to the new SCC rules from December onwards, but there are SCCs. So do you think something will change in that regard as well with the new order, or before that? So when will companies be able to rely on the SCCs as a basis for the transfer?
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is that sort of the data privacy framework that was announced back in March will enable data transfers under a number of mechanisms. And so that will, underpin, those national security commitments will underpin all the commercial transfers. And those include transfers made under the standard contractual clauses, binding corporate rules, and potentially sort of a Privacy Shield again. But so basically the law will have changed, and that will provide sort of companies with the ability to use the standard contractual clauses with greater assurance.
Okay, that I think would also really have a good and a very large impact in the market, because I hear from a lot of companies that they are still struggling with the implementation of the SCCs, because following Schrems 2, there are a lot of supplementary measures that you have to include, and if there are changes on the US side, basically that might make the exercise easier. But as far as I understood, there will be an executive order that will maybe pave the way for the enhanced Privacy Shield in the end. So will the EU be able to, I don't know, reauthorize the Privacy Shield, or enable a new kind of shield, whatever it may be called in the future?
Yeah, I mean, that is sort of the thinking that sort of the executive order implementing the data privacy framework would enable the Commission to adopt an adequacy decision, a new adequacy decision for Privacy Shield. And so that sort of is the what would happen there. But I mean, when the executive order does sort of come out, that we're working on right now, that would be provide the national security commitments that would be necessary to provide assurance for using the standard contractual clauses and any other transfer mechanisms.
Can you share a bit more about the timeline, maybe? Because I heard something Mike happen next week? Will it be next week or next month? And we heard from the commissioner, from Commissioner Reinders today, and from several other experts that even if the executive order is issued, there are a couple of more steps to be taken. So it wouldn't be like President Biden signs the order next week, hopefully, or maybe the week after that, and then everything is settled, right? There is an additional process.
Certainly. I mean, I think that sort of like, again, I can't sort of comment on sort of timelines or when sort of like, the work will be done. We're still sort of like, we've continued to have extensive discussions with the European Commission on this and are working to sort of finalize things as quickly as possible. And certainly, I mean, there will be sort of like, steps to implement this, but I think that sort of like, this would be a major step forward. And I think it will represent sort of it would represent sort of the implementation of the sort of data privacy framework that our presidents agreed to back in March.
So we'll hopefully see the executive order soon. That will maybe have an impact on the SEC use, and then hopefully in a couple of months we'll have an enhanced privacy shield, because I always get as feedback from the German and European companies is that everybody is actually still waiting for a new privacy shield. I mean, as of now, nearly all of the companies are using SCCs to transfer data, but seeing how important the data flow really is between the EU and the US, a true adequacy decision will absolutely help. But we also know that there's a lot of pressure to do it right, because the ruling was quite clear in some regard, and we all know that every new privacy shield will be under heavy scrutiny, right? It will never just be, okay, we have a new privacy shield, everything is fine again, and nobody will check it. There will be a lot of scrutiny, so I get that the work is quite difficult, and you want to get every detail right to make it as stable as possible, to minimize the risk that we have a new privacy shield and will be struck down again, because we had that twice already with Safe Harbor, and then the privacy shield, the first one. So I get that it takes a lot of time, but I hope before we meet again at Bitkom Privacy Conference 2023, we'll have a new privacy shield. That would be absolutely excellent.
Fingers crossed. I am definitely sort of hopeful in that regard, and but yeah, I mean, this is why things have taken so long. I mean, we definitely have had to be very detail oriented in sort of like our efforts to address sort of the Schrems II decision and provide sort of and our hope is that this that the data privacy framework agreed to by our presidents and implemented will be able to provide a durable and reliable basis for transatlantic data flows, because this is an issue that is so fundamental to the transatlantic economic relationship. And also just to sort of like, our broader sort of partnership as, and I think the ability of sort of the United States and the European Union to come together and discuss these issues reasonably and to come to sort of like common understandings on issues as important as privacy and security is a testament to the depth of our relationship and sort of the shared values that underpin it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get that. Maybe one last question, Alex, more like about your daily work, basically, because what I was just thinking about is that, of course, we're looking at it from the European perspective, right? I'm always talking to German and European companies, and I know that they are struggling. Could you share something about what the US companies are telling you regarding the transfer mechanisms or the importance of the transfer? Because we, from the European side, we're always saying the EU-US transfer is the most important, basically. Is it the same discussion on the US side?
Or yes. I mean, we definitely, I mean, this is front and center on the minds of so many US companies. And certainly, I mean, the ability to transfer data with assurance sort of is vital to, I mean, practically every industry. And I think that's one other point that sort of is important to keep in mind is that everyone sort of looks at this as an issue about sort of big tech, but the ability to transfer personal data is important to so many other industries and other services and sort of our ability to cooperate and do business with one another. And so certainly, I mean, I think the uncertainty has definitely, continues to be sort of concerning for industry. And also, I mean, I think it's been challenging for smaller companies who the cost of implementing the SCCs is not insignificant. And I think that like their inability to use Privacy Shield has been a challenge for them. And which is all why sort of we and sort of our partners in the European Commission have really focused on resolving this issue so that we can return stability and certainty to transatlantic data transfers.
Absolutely. I think we're all hoping for the same outcome here, and we've been talking a lot about whether it is truly necessary to build a global data protection framework in the future. And I bet the discussion that are going on just now regarding the EU-US transfer will be one additional aspect, one part of the discussion that we'll have in the upcoming years, maybe decades, about building a global framework to really enable society to exchange as much data and information as they want, and the companies as well, and of course also the public side, authorities and public administration, to be able to share data and knowledge across borders at all times. Thank you so much, Alex. I really hope we'll see each other again at Bitkom Privacy Conference 2023 in 1 year. Maybe here in Berlin, maybe someplace else, but I definitely hope to continue the discussion. Thanks absolutely for sharing everything today. Maybe we'll get an announcement next week or the week after that. We'll be very excited if it comes out. But thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.